The room didn't tense, it soured. 1 second. Ethan wore the smile of a man certain of victory, certain fate was settled. Then the pages stopped turning. His lawyer leaned in, voice barely a breath, and everything shifted. No outrage, no threats, only silence. The moment Ethan understood the win he demanded carried a cost he never imagined. My name is Claire Whitman. I'm 36 years old, and until recently, I was married to Ethan Cole. We lived in a small logistics town in the Western Desert, the kind of place people pass through, not settle in, warehouses, truck stops, endless highways, not glamorous, but everything moved through us. Goods, money, contracts, quietly. Ethan liked to say he built the business from nothing. He said it often, at dinners, at golf outings, to anyone who would listen. And on paper, that was true. His name was on the company. His face was on the website. His truck was the one people noticed in the parking lot. Mine wasn't. I didn't have a title. I didn't have shares. I didn't have a seat at the table when decisions were made. What I had was access. I knew which contracts expired when, which clients paid late, which routes actually made money, and which ones just looked good in presentations. I knew the difference between revenue and cash flow, between growth and debt disguised as growth. I was the one who kept the folders organized, the digital ones and the paper ones. I was the one who noticed when numbers didn't quite line up and fixed them before anyone else saw. I was the one who stayed up late reconciling invoices while Ethan talked about big moves and next-level expansion. But no one ever introduced me that way. I was just Ethan's wife. That's how it usually works, I've learned. The person who understands the system rarely looks powerful from the outside. Power looks loud. Power looks confident. Power drives a newer car every year. Ethan understood appearances. He was very good at them. He knew how to shake hands, how to promise growth without committing to details, how to talk about scale without mentioning cost. People believed him because believing was easier than asking questions. And I let that happen, not because I didn't see it, but because I understood something most people miss. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. It sits quietly in the background, in the process, in the structure, in the parts of the system no one bothers to learn because they assume someone else already has. In our house, that looked like me at the kitchen table with a laptop, while Ethan paced the living room on speakerphone. It looked like me asking, "Did you read the second page?" and him replying, "It's standard. Everyone signs that." It looked like me keeping my voice calm and my questions short. Because I knew something else too. When someone believes they're winning, they stop being careful. Ethan never worried about what I understood. He thought understanding belonged to him by default. I was there to support, to smooth things over, to keep life running so he could focus on being important. And that was fine. For a while, because the truth is, in most conflicts, the person who talks the most is rarely the one in control. The one in control is the person who knows where the levers are. Contracts, processes, obligations tied to signatures no one reads closely. Those things don't feel dramatic. They don't make good dinner conversation. They don't impress strangers. But when things fall apart, they're the only things that matter. I didn't plan a confrontation. I didn't collect evidence to win an argument. I wasn't waiting for revenge. I was paying attention to patterns, to shortcuts, to the way Ethan rushed through anything that slowed him down. People like him hate friction. They see it as incompetence, delay, weakness. People like me see friction as information, and that difference matters. Especially when everything you've built depends on the assumption that no one else is watching closely. That's the part no one talks about when they tell stories like this. They want drama, explosions, screaming matches, clear villains. But most collapses don't start with noise. They start with someone quietly understanding the system better than the person who thinks they own it. And that's where this story really begins. The affair didn't arrive like a lightning strike. It crept in slowly, the way most betrayals do through small changes you explain away because explaining feels safer than confronting. I noticed it in the quiet moments first. Ethan's phone never left his side anymore. Face down on the counter, always on silent. He started taking calls outside, pacing near the trucks, lowering his voice like the desert air itself might be listening. I told myself it was stress, expansion, pressure. That's what wives like me do. We translate red flags into responsibilities. 3 weeks later, I stopped translating. I found the messages on a Tuesday night, after Noah had gone to bed. Nothing dramatic, no declarations of love, just familiarity, inside jokes, plans that didn't include me. That part hurt, but it wasn't the part that scared me. The part that scared me came after. 2 days later, Ethan slid a folder across the kitchen table like it was nothing. We were eating leftovers, cold noodles. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Can you sign this real quick? It's just to keep things moving." I opened the folder. Leasing paperwork, vehicle upgrades, a personal guarantee section highlighted in yellow. I thought these were under the company. I said, "They are," he replied too quickly. "This is just procedural. Everyone signs it." Everyone, that word again. A week later, another document. This one for warehouse expansion. Bigger numbers, longer terms. He was always in a rush now. Meetings, deadlines, momentum. "Trust me," he said. "This is how we grow." That's when I realized something important. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was structural. Ethan wasn't just stepping out of the marriage. He was quietly stepping away from responsibility and repositioning it closer to me. I didn't accuse him. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry or throw the folder across the room. I asked questions, small ones. What happens if the route underperforms? Why does this clause apply to individuals, not just entities? Why is the guarantor line blank on your copy, but not on mine? He laughed them off, kissed my forehead, told me I worried too much. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, contracts spread out like a map. Noah's backpack leaned against the wall, his lunchbox still inside, a reminder of what was actually at stake. Silence gets misunderstood. People think if you're quiet, you're weak, that if you don't react immediately, you're unaware. That's not how it works. Silence can be the space where you listen more carefully than anyone expects. And I listened. I listened when Ethan's mother started calling more often, asking innocent questions about finances, about property, about what was fair if things ever changed. I listened when Rachel, my closest friend, the one who used to bring wine on Fridays, started repeating things Ethan had said to her, casual comments, half-truths, soft pressure disguised as concern. "You should protect him," she said once. "Men carry so much." I watched the way conversations shifted, how the word "we" disappeared and "you" took its place. Then Noah started acting differently. He asked why his dad was gone so much, why people were whispering when they thought he wasn't listening. One night, he asked me if we were still a family. That's when the ground really moved beneath my feet, because adults can rationalize almost anything. Children can't. I realized then that betrayal doesn't come alone. It brings reinforcements, legal language, social pressure, emotional confusion. It creates fog so thick you start doubting what you can clearly see, and it counts on one thing, that you'll react emotionally instead of strategically. I didn't. I stopped signing things to keep things moving. I asked for copies, digital and paper. I started saving versions, dates, email threads. Nothing dramatic. Just documentation. Ethan noticed the change. "You've been quiet," he said one evening. I smiled. "Just tired." That was the truth. But not the whole truth. What he didn't realize was that while he thought he was preparing an exit, I was learning the shape of the room he was trying to leave me in. People like Ethan confuse calm with compliance. They forget that the person who understands the system doesn't need to announce it. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't plotting a downfall. I was protecting my son. And to do that, I needed clarity, not noise. Because when betrayal spreads across love, money, and trust, the loudest response is rarely the smartest one. Sometimes the strongest move is to let them believe you don't see what you see, to let them rush, to let them sign, to let them forget who you are. And that was the moment everything began to change. 2 nights after Ethan told me I was overthinking, I did what I always do when something feels off. I went back to the paperwork, not the glossy folder he liked to show people, not the summaries, not the little charts that made everything look clean and profitable. The real paperwork, the kind that smells like printer ink and cheap binder clips, the kind that doesn't care about your feelings. I waited until the house was quiet. Noah asleep. The desert wind tapping the window like it had something to say. I spread the documents across the kitchen table and opened my laptop. At first, it looked like normal business chaos. A lease here, an equipment upgrade there, a warehouse expansion proposal with too many pages and too many signatures. But then I noticed the pattern. The same lender name appearing over and over. The same clauses repeating. The same numbers shifting between company responsibility and personal guarantee like a shell game. Ethan wasn't just growing the business. He was stacking obligations, one on top of another. And the scary part wasn't the amount. It was how quiet it all was. How easy it would be to miss if you weren't looking for it. People think debt shows up like a warning sign, like a giant red stamp that says, "You are in trouble." It doesn't. Debt shows up as a monthly payment that seems manageable, a limited time offer on new equipment, a strategic move that will pay for itself. It shows up as confidence, as momentum, as everyone around you nodding like it's normal, until you add it up. So I started adding. I pulled statements from vendors. I tracked invoices. I cross-referenced lease schedules with root revenue. I checked what was fixed, what was variable, what was tied to fuel, what was tied to seasonal contracts. And little by little, the picture formed. The trucks weren't fully owned. They were leased. The warehouse expansion wasn't funded. It was financed. The equipment upgrade was another contract with a balloon payment at the end. And then there was the worst part, the guarantees. Not just one, multiple. Some written as standard, some tucked into appendices. some labeled as if they were harmless acknowledgments. But they all meant the same thing. If the business couldn't pay, someone else would. And Ethan was positioning it so that someone else could be me. That was the moment my stomach dropped, not because I was surprised, but because I finally understood what the real fight was going to be about. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about who got the better lawyer. It wasn't even about the affair. It was about liability, about who would be left holding the weight when the story Ethan was selling finally collapsed. And before you say, how could you not know I want you to hear me clearly? This happens all the time. Not because people are careless, because in a lot of marriages, money isn't a shared space. It's controlled territory. Some homes run on transparency, 2 logins, 2 sets of eyes, weekly check-ins, but plenty of homes don't. They run on roles. One person earns, the other manages life. One person talks numbers, the other trusts. And trust, especially in a long marriage, becomes a kind of survival. You don't dig too hard. You don't question every transaction. You don't ask for every password, because you tell yourself that asking would create conflict, and conflict would break the peace. So you accept the summary instead of the statement. You accept, we're fine, instead of, show me. And you don't realize you're standing over a hole until the ground shifts. Ethan knew that about me. He knew I preferred calm. He knew I didn't like fighting. He assumed that meant I wouldn't look. But here's another thing people misunderstand. Not fighting doesn't mean not noticing. That night, I found a folder I hadn't opened in years. Old contracts from when the company was small. Back when Ethan still asked me to proofread things because he trusted my eye. In the back of that folder was a template, a contract framework I'd helped organize and clean up early on. Not because I wanted credit, because I wanted it done right. I stared at it for a long time, and I realized something that made my hands go cold. The structure hadn't changed much. The language was familiar. The loopholes were the same. Ethan had been building on a foundation he didn't fully understand. He was signing things based on confidence, not comprehension. And the people around him, his mother, his friends, even Rachel weren't looking at the fine print either. They were looking at the lifestyle, at the new truck, at the dinners, at the story. But contracts don't care about stories. Contracts care about signatures. And suddenly I understood what this was. The assets Ethan was so proud of weren't prizes. They were obligations wearing nice clothes. They were debt dressed up as success. And if you've ever watched someone walk proudly into a room they didn't realize was on fire, you know the feeling I had in that moment. It's not panic. It's clarity. Because once you see the truth in black and white, you can't unsee it. I didn't confront Ethan the next morning. I made coffee, packed Noah's lunch, smiled when Ethan kissed my cheek like nothing was happening. And then, when the house was quiet again, I kept reading. Because the real secret wasn't that Ethan had cheated. The real secret was that he thought he was the only one who understood what he'd built. He forgot who I was, and he forgot that I can read what other people skip. That's when the game changed. 3 weeks after I laid everything out on the kitchen table, I stopped looking for confirmation. I didn't need more proof. I needed timing. Ethan was already moving fast, faster than usual. He talked about clean exits and simplifying assets. He said it like he was doing me a favor. That's when I understood the last piece. He wasn't just trying to leave the marriage. He was trying to leave the weight behind. The meeting was scheduled on a Thursday morning, Neutral office, glass walls, long table. The kind of place where everyone speaks softly because they assume the room itself is powerful. Ethan walked in relaxed, confident. He nodded at his lawyer like this was just another deal, another box to check. I sat across from him, hands folded, saying very little. That made him comfortable. People who talk a lot get nervous around silence. Ethan never did. He mistook my quiet for agreement. The documents were stacked neatly in front of him. Asset transfers, responsibility allocations, a clean separation, on paper. He smiled when he flipped to the signature pages. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. What he didn't know was that I recognized the structure immediately. The layout, the phrasing, the way certain clauses were placed far enough apart that you wouldn't connect them unless you'd seen it before. Years ago, before the company had a name, people recognized. Ethan used to ask me to review things. Not officially, just casually. Can you look at this? Does this make sense? Why does this sentence feel off? I didn't draft contracts from scratch. I organized them, cleaned them up, flagged inconsistencies, made sure the language matched the intent. I was good at it. And those early templates, they never really went away. They evolved, got longer, more polished, but the bones were the same, including the part everyone skips. The personal guarantee expansion. It's not dramatic. It's a few lines, buried under headings that sound harmless. But once triggered, it doesn't care how confident you felt signing it. It follows the signature. Ethan flipped through the pages quickly. Too quickly. Looks good, he said, already reaching for the pen. That's when his lawyer hesitated. Just a second. A pause so small most people wouldn't notice. But I noticed. She leaned in closer to the documents. Her finger stopped on a section she hadn't paid attention to before. She frowned. "Hold on," she said quietly. Ethan laughed. "What? It's standard." She didn't laugh back. She turned a page, then another. The room shifted. Not dramatically. No raised voices, no accusations, just a change in posture. She leaned toward him and lowered her voice. I didn't hear what she said. I didn't need to. I watched Ethan's expression change as the words landed. First confusion, then irritation, then something else. Calculation. His smile faded. His grip on the pen tightened. The pen shook just slightly, like it was suddenly heavier than it had been a moment ago. "What do you mean expanded?" he asked. She pointed again. Calm, precise. "This clause activates if the asset transfer is executed as written," she said. "It extends personal liability beyond the company." Ethan frowned. "That's not it is," she replied. "And it's already in effect." Silence. The kind of silence that feels thick, like the air has weight. He looked at me then. Really looked. For the first time in a long time. Not as the woman sitting across from him, not as the wife he thought he'd outmaneuvered, but as someone who knew something he didn't. "You knew about this?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the papers. The same ones he'd rushed me to sign weeks earlier. The same structure he'd trusted without reading. I recognized it. I said finally. That was enough. Because this wasn't about tricking him or outsmarting him. This was about understanding the system he'd been relying on without respect. People assume power comes from volume, from dominance, from being the loudest person in the room. But real power comes from comprehension. from knowing how things actually work when the story falls apart. Ethan had believed that controlling the narrative meant controlling the outcome. He forgot that outcomes live in details, in clauses, in definitions, in obligations that don't disappear just because someone stops paying attention. His lawyer kept explaining, carefully, professionally, too late. Each sentence added another layer of understanding. Not for me, for him. The more she spoke, the smaller he became in his chair. And I realized something important in that moment. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. Because this wasn't a victory created in that room. It was the result of years of being overlooked, of learning quietly, of paying attention when no one thought it mattered. People who understand the system don't need to raise their voice. They let the system speak. Ethan signed what he came to sign, but he didn't leave with what he thought he'd won. And as we stood to leave, I noticed something that told me everything had shifted. He didn't rush anymore. He read every page again, carefully, like someone who had just realized that confidence is not the same thing as control. And that was the moment the balance changed for good. The ruling came down on a Tuesday afternoon. No gavel slam, no dramatic pause, just a calm voice reading terms that sounded clean and final. On paper, it was a win. Clear boundaries, clear responsibility, clear separation. Everyone around me seemed to expect a reaction. Relief, satisfaction, something. I felt none of it. I walked out of the building holding a folder that summarized 15 years of marriage in fewer than 20 pages. Asset lists, dates, signatures, numbers that were supposed to mean closure. Outside, the parking lot was almost empty, heat rising off the asphalt, a delivery truck idling at the corner, waiting for a light to change. Life didn't pause for verdicts. That was the first thing that struck me. That night, Noah asked if we were done now. He didn't mean the paperwork. He meant the tension, the whispered phone calls, the way adults spoke in careful half-sentences around him. I told him we were done with the hard meetings. He nodded like that was enough, then asked what we were having for dinner. Kids are good at that. They live in the present, even when the past is still bleeding quietly behind them. After he went to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen. Same table, same chair, different silence. I thought about everything that hadn't been discussed in court. The nights I lay awake listening for Ethan's car, the way I stopped sharing small things because they were met with indifference. The slow shift from we to you that happened so gradually, I couldn't point to the moment it broke. None of that showed up in the transcript. There was no line item for trust, no paragraph explaining what it feels like to realize the person you built your life with has been building something else behind your back. No checkbox for the moment your child asks questions you don't know how to answer without hurting them. The court handled responsibility, but grief doesn't care about responsibility. It shows up anyway, in the quiet moments, in the absence of noise where arguments used to be, in the strange calm that follows a long storm. I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't miss Ethan. I missed the idea that we were on the same side, that someone else was carrying part of the weight with me. That loss had happened long before the affair, long before the contracts, long before the lawyers. It just took the crisis to make it visible. People talk about winning like it's supposed to feel loud, like justice comes with fireworks. But sometimes, justice arrives quietly, and all that's left is space. Space to notice what you've been carrying alone for a very long time. I thought about the years I shrank myself to keep things stable, the conversations I softened, the instincts I ignored because I didn't want to be difficult. That wasn't written anywhere either. No judge asks how much of yourself you gave up to keep the peace. No ruling restores the parts of you that learn to stay silent for survival. Those losses don't get reversed. They get acknowledged. And then you decide what to do with them. A week later, Noah had a school project about safe places. He drew our new apartment, small, plain, a little crooked. He colored the kitchen green because, he said, that's where you're always calm. I stared at the drawing longer than I should have, because calm wasn't something I'd had for years. It was something I'd been performing. And now, somehow, it was real. Not because everything was fixed, but because the pretending was over. That's the part no one tells you. Closure isn't about getting everything back. It's about stopping the bleed. It's about realizing that some things were gone long before anyone said the word divorce. And that doesn't make you weak. It makes you honest. I folded the court papers and put them in a drawer, not because they didn't matter, but because they were finished telling their story. The rest, the parts that never made it into the record, those were mine now, to grieve, to learn from, to protect my son from carrying forward. There are losses you can count. And then there are losses that teach you where your boundaries should have been all along. Those don't show up in any official document, but they shape everything that comes after. And that's when I understood something quietly, without relief or regret. The hardest things I lost weren't taken from me in court. They slipped away slowly while I was trying to hold everything together. Now that I could finally see them clearly, I wasn't angry. I was awake. And that, more than any ruling, changed what came next. A month after everything was finalized, someone asked me if I felt smarter now. They didn't mean it kindly or cruelly, just curious. Like intelligence was the reason one person walked away standing and the other didn't. I thought about that for a long time, because the truth is, I didn't suddenly become smarter. I didn't gain some secret knowledge overnight. I didn't outthink Ethan in a dramatic way. I didn't win because I was sharper or more talented. I won because I finally understood what game I was in. Most people don't lose because they're incapable. They lose because they're playing by rules that don't actually decide the outcome. In marriage, we think the game is love, or loyalty, or effort. In work, we think it's performance, or hours worked, or being indispensable. In business, we think it's vision, or hustle, or confidence. But underneath all of that, there's always another layer. The system, the contracts no one reads, the policies no one explains, the assumptions everyone agrees to without realizing they're agreeing to them. Ethan believed the game was momentum. As long as things looked successful, he thought they were successful. As long as people believed the story, he believed the ending was guaranteed. And for a long time, he wasn't wrong. But systems don't reward belief. They reward positioning. Where your name appears, what your signature activates, which obligations follow you even after you walk away. I didn't beat Ethan by outmaneuvering him. I stood still while he moved himself into a corner he didn't know existed. That's the part people miss when they watch stories like this. They assume the person who ends up okay must have been secretly plotting, that they were colder, more ruthless, more calculating. But most of the time, the truth is simpler and harder to admit. One person understands the structure, the other doesn't, and structure always wins. I see this everywhere now. In workplaces where the quiet employee carries institutional knowledge but never gets credit until something breaks. In families where one person manages everything emotional and logistical, but has no legal protection when things fall apart. In businesses where founders celebrate growth without understanding liability until expansion turns into exposure. People don't fail because they're weak. They fail because they were never taught how the system actually works. And the system doesn't care how hard you tried. It only cares what was agreed to. I think back to all the moments I was told I was overreacting, all the times I was asked to just trust the process, all the times keeping the peace was treated like maturity. Those weren't signs of my inadequacy. They were signs that I was standing in the wrong position. Once I stepped into the place where the rules were written instead of just followed, everything changed. Not because I became powerful, but because I stopped being invisible. There's a difference. Power demands attention. Position doesn't. Position just determines what happens when things go wrong. And things always go wrong eventually. That's what systems are built for. Not success. Failure. So when people ask me how I managed to come out okay, I don't talk about intelligence. I talk about awareness, about learning where decisions are actually made, about reading what matters instead of reacting to what's loud, about knowing that silence can be observation, not surrender. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make threats. I didn't try to control the narrative. I paid attention to the rules while everyone else was watching the performance. That's not brilliance. That's literacy, system literacy. And once you have it, you start seeing the world differently. You realize how many people are exhausted not because they're doing too much, but because they're doing it in the wrong place. How many people blame themselves for losses that were baked in long before they ever had a choice? How many people think they're failing when they're just mispositioned? If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this: before you ask yourself why you're losing, ask yourself what game you're actually playing. Because effort in the wrong arena doesn't turn into victory. It turns into burnout. Understanding doesn't make you heartless. It makes you prepared. And preparedness isn't about control. It's about clarity. I didn't walk away smarter than everyone else. I walked away clearer. Clear about where responsibility lives. Clear about where protection begins. Clear about what I will never again sign without understanding. That clarity didn't come from anger. It came from paying attention long enough to see the pattern. So if you've ever felt like you were doing everything right and still falling behind, consider this. You might not be failing. You might just be playing by rules that were never designed for you to win. Once you see that, you don't need to fight harder. You need to stand somewhere else. And that shift quiet, structural, invisible to most people, that's what actually changes outcomes. Not noise, not confidence, not even intelligence. Just knowing where you are and what that position really means. The apartment is quiet in the mornings, not empty, just calm. No rushing footsteps, no sharp voices carrying tension from one room to another, just the sound of the kettle, the hum of traffic outside, and Noah flipping pages at the table while he eats his cereal. It's smaller than the house we used to live in. Fewer rooms, fewer things, but nothing feels missing. That took me a while to understand. For a long time, I thought strength meant holding on, holding the marriage together, holding the image together, holding myself together so nothing spilled over. Now I know strength can also look like letting go of what was never really yours to carry alone. If you're listening to this and you feel like you're on the losing side of something, your marriage, your job, your family, here's what I want you to consider. Before you ask yourself what you've lost, look at what you're still holding, not the obvious things, not money, not titles, not approval. Look at what you understand that others overlook. Look at what you manage quietly. What you notice before it becomes a problem. What you've been protecting without recognition. Because being underestimated often means you're standing close to the truth. People don't pay attention to what they don't value, and that gives you space. Space to observe, space to learn, space to position yourself without resistance. I didn't rebuild my life with a dramatic gesture. There was no announcement, no victory speech. I changed small things. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening. I read before I signed. I asked questions I used to swallow. I paid attention to my instincts instead of dismissing them as fear. And slowly, quietly, things aligned. Noah laughs more now. Not louder, just easier. I sleep without my phone on the pillow. I don't flinch when the door opens late. That's not winning in the way movies sell it, but it's winning in the way life actually feels. If you're in a place right now where people talk over you, decide for you, assume you'll go along because you always have pause. Don't rush to prove them wrong. Don't rush to fight. Just look around and ask yourself one question. What do I understand here that others don't? It might be the numbers. It might be the dynamics. It might be the emotional cost no one else is accounting for. Whatever it is, that knowledge matters, not immediately, not loudly, but eventually. Being in a weak position doesn't mean you are weak. It often means you've been doing invisible work for a long time, and invisible work builds awareness. Awareness builds leverage. Leverage doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like choice. The choice to step out of patterns that drain you. The choice to stop signing away parts of yourself. The choice to protect what actually matters, your peace, your clarity, your child. I didn't end up with more than I started with. I ended up with less noise, less fear, less pretending, and more room to breathe. So if you feel cornered, overlooked, or quietly exhausted, don't assume that means you're losing. It might mean you're closer to the truth than everyone else in the room. And once you see the truth, you don't need permission to move. You don't need applause. You just need to choose your next step carefully. Because sometimes, the strongest position isn't the one everyone sees. It's the one you finally claim for yourself.